Greetings and welcome to this talk on machine-checked semantic session typing. This is joint work between myself, Daniel Ulrink, Robert Kreppers, and Jesper Bengtsson. Before getting to the problem that we're trying to address, I just briefly want to talk a bit about session types just to make sure that we're all on the same page on this. Now, session types is a type system for message passing in which we can specify protocols of sending or receiving types of type A and then continue as S. At their core, there are these three constructors stating that we can either send something of type A, receive something of type A, or terminate. An example of such a session type is then the following, where we first receive an integer, then send an integer, and then terminate. The way that session types are used is using this explicit session to term type coercion chan, which we can then use to type check channel endpoints. In session types, there is this important notion of duality in which the dual of a session type is the same session type where all the sends and receives have been flipped. This is very useful when we have the new chan rule, which states that we can always allocate a new channel, which returns two channel endpoints, one with a freely picked session type and one with its dual. We can then, after that, use the send rule, which requires us to show that the two arguments are, first of all, a session type that expects receiving something of A, and the other value is, in fact, of type A. The result of this expression is a unit value. However, there is a post context which captures that the channel has been updated to the tail of the protocol. As for receive, we conversely require that we have a receiving channel endpoint. The result of the expression is the received type A, and the post context again captures that the channel has been updated to the tail. An example of a program which uses these kind of channels is the following, which is a function over a channel, where we then receive on the channel, then add 2 to the value that we've received, and send it back. A valid type for this program is the following, which is a function type, stating that the channel has a session type, which must first receive an integer and then send back an integer. So the problems that we address is that while session types is a very impressive system that has many features, there are 3 outstanding problems. First of all, there's a lack of feature-rich session type systems. While polymorphism, recursion, and subtyping have been studied individually, there is no session type system that combines all 3 of them. There is no support for racy yet safe programs. This means that the problem here is that session type systems enforce a strict ownership discipline of channels, meaning that they cannot occur in 2 separate threads at the same time. Because of that, there is no way to type check safe use of exclusive resources. Consider the following program here, where we have a function over a channel, over which we then receive twice in parallel and return the results of those received as a tuple. A type of this program could be a session type that expects receiving 2 integers, and then the result is the product type of 2 integers. And while this would be safe to execute, because the order in which we receive does not matter, it is impossible to type check because of this strict ownership discipline. Finally, there is a lack of mechanized soundness proof for session type systems. While there does exist few results, they are for simpler systems, and there exist no such results for more expensive systems, such as the one that we want to define. So the key idea of our work is to use the technique of semantic typing, first pioneered by Milner, and then made more popular by Amal Ahmed. Now in this technique, type systems are defined in terms of the language semantics, and this is modernly done by using a program logic to make those definitions. And that is so that we can inherit the expressivity and soundness of the underlying logic. This additionally allows us to manually prove safe yet untypable programs, which I will cover later. So the crux of the semantic typing technique is to have a logic which is expressive enough to capture all the features that you want in your type system. This is why we use the iris logic, which is a higher order concurrent separation logic, which means that it already have built-in support for recursion, concurrency, and substructural resources. Additionally, it is mechanized in clock with full syntactic support, which helps us in our own mechanization effort, as I will show later. Now, to incorporate session types in our type system, we use the Actress logical framework built on top of Iris, This is work done by ourselves at last year's POPL. In this work, we introduce a novel notion of dependency separation protocols, which can be thought of as logical session types. This too has been mechanized in Coq with full stack support. The contribution of our work is then a machine-checked semantic session type system. This is first and foremost a rich and extensible type system for session types, in that we have term and session type E-free recursion, term and session type polymorphism, term and asynchronous session type subtyping, as well as unique and shared reference types, copyable types, and log types. Furthermore, it supports the integration of safe yet untypable programs through manual proving. And finally, we have a full mechanization in Coq, which you can find online. So let me first touch a bit upon what it means to define a semantic type system by contrasting it to the more common approach of syntactic typing. So in a syntactic type system, types are defined as a closed inductive definition, meaning that we define our type A as, for instance, integers, product types, and more. And then we define rules as a closed inductive relation between the expression and values of our language and the types, for instance, the rule for literal integers, stating that the integers belong to the integer type. With a type system, we want to achieve type safety, which states that if we can prove a judgment stating that the expression E has type A, then E is safe. This formally means that for any reduction of E to E prime is either a value or it can reduce further. Now the way that we prove type safety is by using the technique of progress and preservation, where progress is defined as if we can prove our typing judgment, then E is either a value or it can take a single step. Preservation is then defined as if we can prove our typing judgment and that E can take one step to E prime, then E prime also have the typing judgment of E prime also holds, stating that it has type A. Now with these two, progress and preservation, we can prove type safety using induction over the steps of the program. Now to contrast all of this, semantic typing is defined in terms of the language semantics. This means that types are defined as predicates over value, which more concretely is stated as such. The literal integers is then defined as a predicate for set inclusion of integers. A more complex type, such as the one for products, is defined as follows, where we state that the value w is a literal pair of the constituent values w1, w2, and that the type predicate a1 and a2 of the product type holds for the corresponding values w1, w2. In our semantic type system, judgments are then defined as a safety capturing evaluation. That means that our typing judgment, which is similar in syntax to the syntactic typing judgment, states that E is safe, and if it reduces to a value, then EFV holds. Now with this definition, rules are instead proven as lemmas, which in the case of the typing rule for literal integers means that we first have to prove safety, which is trivial as the integer is a value, and that if it reduces to a value, which it is, then we have to show the type predicate, which is simple set inclusion, which is again trivial. Now, we too want to define or prove type safety, in this case semantic type safety, stating that if we can prove our semantic type judgment for E has type A, then E is safe. And this is a direct consequence of our judgment definition, as well it being a part of the definition. So to make this a bit more concrete, we stated that we want to apply this technique to iris. And we can do this first and foremost by instead using iprop instead of prop, which is the type of iris propositions. By doing this, we implicitly thread the heap through all of our proofs, which is similar in spirit to us defining our types as values into heap into prop. Additionally, however, by working with iprop, we also implicitly handle step index recursion and user defined go state. Although I won't have too much time to get into the details of just that, although it should be mentioned that it is quite important for the expressivity of our type system. Now with iris, we can also make the definition of a judgment a bit more concrete by defining it as the weakest precondition of iris. That is, since it captures that the expression E is safe, and that if it reduces to a value, then the postcondition phi, in this case chosen as the type predicate of A, holds for that value. Additionally, it implicitly handles the distribution of the resources in a heap and concurrency of our program. This definition too directly captures that E is safe, meaning that the semantic type system safety is still a consequence of the definition. So with Iris, an additional benefit is that we can simply replace the regular conjunction in our product types with Iris's separation conjunction to obtain a substructural product type. That is, since the separation conjunction states that P and Q hold for disjoint parts of the heap. Now this is important when you have substructural types that capture resources, as this enforces that the values of such a type can only belong to either of the types of this product. One such substructural type is that of unique references, as you see here, which states that the values of the type are locations on the heap, and that they have exclusive ownership of the location as captured by this points to connective, which just does just that, in addition to stating that the location points to some value v. Finally, we also claim that we have separate ownership of the type predicate as dictated by the unique reference type, which holds for the value that the reference points to. Finally, we can sprinkle out these later modalities to guard the type arguments of our various type formers in order to obtain equi-recursion using Iris's guarded recursion operator. And I won't have too much time to get into the details of this. I just want to be transparent that this is something that you actually have to do manually, although it is not too complicated to do. Now, the session type rules that you saw initially warrant that we have sort of a pre and post context of our judgment. That is to capture that the session types change throughout the execution of the message passing expressions send and receive. So we need a semantic judgment which have these pre and post context as follows here. Now, the crux of this definition is to have a semantic definition of what it means to be a type context. And we do that using a common technique of closing substitutions. Now, this closing substitution judgment here states that, or captures that, we have separate ownership of each of the type predicates in the type context gamma, and there exists a value in the closing substitution for each of those type predicates. This is made concrete using the iterated separation conjunction, which states that some predicate phi holds for each of the values in a collection. Here, this is used to state that each of the pairs of variables and type predicates in gamma, that for each of those, we can look up the variable in the closing substitution sigma to obtain a value for which the type predicate A then holds. Now with this, we can define our semantic typing judgment. This can be done by modifying our weakest precondition before with a precondition and a postcondition, if you will. The way to do this is by using the separation implication, which is similar in spirit to regular implication as it is adjoint to the separation conjunction. It states that we can give up the ownership of the predicates on the left-hand side to obtain the ones on the right-hand side. In this case, we have to give up the ownership of the closing substitution judgment of the pre-context gamma for some value substitution sigma. Then we obtain a weakest precondition over the expression of the judgment up to the substitution of sigma. And then, in addition to the type predicate of A, as we had before in our post-condition, we additionally have the value substitution judgment of the post-context gamma prime. Now, all of this is highly inspired by the Rust Build project, and I just want to make that clear, stating that there is not too much novel going on up until this point. However, I think going forward will be something that of our own contribution. So, to make all of this a bit more concrete, I will just go through an example proof to see how it all comes together. Now, the lemma, or the rule we want to prove, is that for the parallel composition, the rule states that to show that the parallel composition of E1 and E2 results in a product type of A1 and A2, we have to show the typing judgment of E1 and E2 separately for those types using a separate footprint of the pre-context gamma 1, gamma 2 and as a result we obtain separate footprints of post context gamma 1 prime and gamma 2 prime. Unfolding this rule results in the following proof application, which first and foremost have two preconditions, two assumptions, which is the assumptions of our judgment assumptions of E1 and E2. An additional assumption is then the value substitution judgment of the precontext of gamma 1, gamma 2. So the way the proof follows is by first introducing all of those assumptions, getting us HE1, HE2, and H gamma as you see here. We then first use a context splitting lemma, which states that if we have such a composition of two contexts, we can split them up so that we own them separately. Now we can employ the iris weakest precondition rule for parallel composition, which states that we have to prove the weakest precondition for E1 and E2 separately. We can resolve these proof obligations by applying our judgment assumptions of E1 and E2, HE1 and HE2, sorry. Now these in turn will give us two new proof obligations of their precontexts, which we then have, or which we can then discharge with our assumptions of H gamma 1 and H gamma 2. Now as a result, we obtain the post-context of the preconditions of E1 and E2 in the lemma here shown as phi1 and phi2, which are of course the type predicates of A1, A2, and their post-context judgments. So this is what we obtain here. Now to close the proof, we have to show the post-context of the parallel composition, which is the type predicate and the combined post-context. We do this using the rule for separation conjunction, which states that we can prove the constituent propositions with two distinct parts of the heap. So for the first part, we want to prove the type predicate using our type predicate assumptions. And as you might recall, this is just existential quantification, as long with proof obligations of the two type predicates, A1 and A2, which we already have as assumptions, meaning that this just follows trivially. As for the post-context, we can reuse our post-context splitting lemma, which goes in both directions, meaning that we can say that we want to prove this separately, which corresponds exactly to our context assumptions. And with that, we're done. So now, with all this put in place, let's move on to defining our own semantic session type system. The language that we consider is an ML-like language, which have been extended with state, concurrency, locks, and message passing primitives. Now these message passing primitives are binary, meaning that each channel only have one pair of endpoints. They are asynchronous, meaning that sends do not block. We can just resolve them by queuing their values in a buffer. There are two buffers between each pair endpoint, meaning that there can be messages in transit in both directions at the same time. And finally, it is affine, meaning that there is no close expressions as channels are garbage collected. So what we want, or what we need to do, is then define a semantic account of the session types for a semantic type system. Now we define the session types as a new type kind, here type diamond, which means that we also need another type kind for our term types, which in this case is type star. Additionally, we need a definition for this explicit session to term type coercion chan. Whatever this definition may be, we need to capture that channels are exclusive, that whenever we send something, we actually have to give it up, and that we have session fidelity, meaning that whenever something is received, it will in fact have been sent before. The way that we do this, the way that we achieve these definitions, is by using the actress dependent separation protocols, which have type iproto. Now these are session type inspired protocols used for functional correctness. That is, since they describe exchanges of logical variables, physical values, and propositions or ownership, as opposed to types. Now, example of that is the following, where instead of having the session type stating that we receive an integer and send an integer, our dependent separation protocol states that we receive a logical variable x, which is an integer, such that the physical value is x, with no additional restriction as the proposition is true. What we then need to send back is a new logical variable y, which is an integer, a physical value, which is that integer, and a proposition stating that the value y is exactly x, the original value, plus 2. So this is like the session type in that we exchange integers, but with additional specification restricting the value of the integer that we send back. The way that we use these dependency separation protocols is with this C points to prod channel endpoint ownership connective, which is similar in spirit to the points to predicate in that it asserts exclusive ownership of the channel and that the channel follows the protocol prod. An example is then to reconsider the program that we had on the very first slide where we receive an integer and send it back plus 2, for which we can then define the following specification that the channel follows the dependency separation protocol of our example. And with this we can sort of show the functional correctness of the program. So with these dependency separation protocols in hand, we can actually define our semantic session types as follows. Their type is simply iperto. The send and receive types are defined as communicating a logical variable which is a value of the language, such that the physical value is that value, and the proposition stating that the type predicate as dictated by the semantic session type holds for the value that we exchanged. As for the explicit coercion, it is defined as the channel endpoint ownership for the session type as dictated by the type predicate. Now to make that more concrete, once again, I want to go through an example proof of the receive rule. Now, unfolding this rule yields the following proof obligation in that we have an assumption, which is our pre-context of gamma, which includes a typing of the variable x, which is a session type which expects to receive something of a. We start out by introducing our assumption. Then we use another context splitting lemma, which states that we can pick out the individual types of our context to obtain the values that the variables points to, and stating that we have the type predicate between, therefore, the type predicate dictated by the context for that value. This yields us that x points to some channel C, which have a session type that expects to be receiving. We can then use the rule for receive, which states that we can give up ownership of a channel that expects to be receiving to resolve a weakest precondition of receive, for which the post-condition is that we reobtain the variables dictated by the protocol, a proposition stating that the receive value is exactly equivalent to the one dictated by the protocol up to substitution. We reobtain ownership of our channel, now pointing to the tail of the protocol up to substitution, along with the proposition dictated by the protocol up to substitution. Now this proposition is the type predicate of A, which means that we now achieve the following assumptions, which is the tail of the protocol and the type predicate of A. We can then first discharge the proof obligation of the type predicate by simply consuming it, and then use our context splitting lemma to stitch back together the context, as we know that x still points to C, which now follows the session type S. And with that, we're done. So with this, we have a strong foundation for our semantic session type system. However, we have still only shown sort of simple and not so novel definitions, although we claim that we would have a rich and extensible type system. So let me just briefly touch upon how we managed to achieve our extensions. And that is, since iris and actress gives immediate rise to many type features. You have already seen how we achieved product types from this operation conjunction, how we got unique references by the points to predicate, how we got session types from the dependency separation protocols of actress. Now we can also achieve function types using the separation implication or WAND and the weakest precondition of iris. We can get shared reference using iris's invariance, and now again I don't want to get into what these things are exactly, I just want to show that there is actually a corresponding to something that already exists. We get copyable types from iris's persistent modality, log types by employing iris's log library. Session choice types can also be encoded with actress dependency separation protocols. Recursion can be achieved using guarded step index recursion by carefully placing these layer modalities in the right places. Term polymorphism follows since iris is higher order and impredicative. Session polymorphism follows since the binders of our demand separation protocols are also higher order and impredicative. Term subtyping follows since predicates are closed under the wand, or the separation implication. And session subtyping follows as actors have recently been extended to Actors 2.0 in yet to be published work, in which we introduce a notion of subprotocols, which are similar in spirit to session subtyping. Now, to further evidence how these correspond, these are all the definition of the various types that I just mentioned. Once again, I don't want you to understand exactly how these definitions are work out. I just want to give you the impression that there is a quite clear correspondence and that you can capture each of the types quite simply by having the existing connectives in iris and actress. As for the manual typing proofs of safe yet untypable programs, you might recall this judgment here of the program where we receive twice on a channel and return the result as a pair. This thing cannot be type checked by conventional session type systems. However, it can be type checked with our semantic type system. And that is because this rule is just another lemma. We can prove that by unfolding all the type definitions, which yield us the following proof obligation, where the precondition or assumption is just the assumption that we have exclusive ownership of the channel as dictated by the channel type. And the post context is that we have to show the resulting value is in fact 2 integers. Now this thing is entirely provable using Iris's ghost state machinery, although doing so is beyond the scope of this talk, but of course you can find more about it in the paper. Now an important thing to note is that by treating this thing as an ad hoc rule or an ad hoc judgment that you just prove and add to your type system, it fully composes with the rest of the type systems, the rest of the typing rules in your system. So you can sort of try to type check some expression, and the second you reach this guy, you will try to add him as an ad hoc rule to a type system in order to fully type the whole thing. Now as for some concluding remarks. We posed 3 problems initially. We solved the first problem as we now have a feature-rich session type system, and that is since we combine polymorphism, recursion, asynchronous session subtyping, and more features. We did so by exploiting the expressivity of iris and actress. We additionally support racy yet safe programs in our type system, and that is since you can always just extend your type system with judgments for such racy programs like the one we've already seen. And that can be done by unfolding the definition and then use iris and actress's reasoning principles, such as iris's ghost state mechanisms. And finally, we have mechanized our sentence proof and the rest of our results in COG, which you can still find online. We did so, or we managed to do so, by building on top of iris and actress's frameworks, which gave us a lot of help and a lot of stuff for free. And finally, you can also find a stable version of this artifact at this Synodo link. And that's everything I have for you today. So thank you so much for listening, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions. Thank you.